All right, the next part of the case of writing books. Books about writing, books about books. So this is Shelf 2, Part 2. Poetry in 6 dimensions. You gotta love an anthology like this. 20th century voices. Things like this help readers become more well-rounded and complete in what they know. So I really value them for that reason. Cambridge, Massachusetts. Very literary town. It is where the very first books in English were printed in what's now the United States of America. I read a Puritan translation of Psalms, and they rhymed and were clunky. Not good. And Moses Coit Tyler's History of American Literature before 1770, which I loved, even though it is very of its time, but which taught me a lot and gave me a new lens for literature. He's all, thank goodness so little Puritan poetry survives. I'm like, are you supposed to be celebrating American writing? Funny. Yeah, I briefly remember having a zip code that started with a 0 when I lived there. And I had a zip code that started with a 9 when I lived in Alaska. Wow. I've really done it all. Once in Boulder, Colorado, I met this guy who his thing was being a street performer, and you could tell him where you were from and he'd tell you your zip code right away. He had them all memorized somehow. Then he offered to sell me a bass guitar, which apparently was a code for something. A lot of good poets in here. Yeah. Sylvia Plath, Gary Snyder. And Scott Momaday, Pablo Neruda, Langston Hughes, Denise Levertov, Joy Harjo, UNM represent. She went from UNM to being Poet Laureate of the U.S. Well, every collection should have more poetry, you know. You're going to collect books, you got to have some poetry. Find some sort of poetry that you like. It's good. It's good for you. Speaking of poetry anthologies, interesting that some of them are in the art crit and lit crit section and some are in the writing section. I think my collection's not that organized. Or as I said, very vibes based. And also maybe some of these things are going to get moved around. The collection is constantly resifting and resettling and shifting. Good old Robert Creeley. I know, man. As I said to my friend, because I'm always talking John, I said, which was not his name, the darkness surrounds us. What can we do against it? Or else shall we, and why not, buy a goddamn big car? Drive, he said, for Christ's sake. Look out where you're going. 1962. Robert Creeley. Speaking of UNM connections, Edward Abbey wrote about him a bit too, being here. I don't know about that image. An American flag in the stars. On a design level, I just don't love the American flag. This is better. If it were just all stars like this, that's kind of interesting. But it like has a way over representation of just 13 states from a specific perspective. You know, they're represented as stars and as stripes. And then every other place just also gets a star. You know, red for the blood of the soldiers, blue for the sky above. No, not for noble blood and aristocracy. No. What's the white for? I love stuff like this. Maybe I'll read a collection of poetry anthologies too. I just put together a stack of essay anthologies I'm going to slowly read. Maybe I'll make a trilogy of poetry anthologies too. Yeah, I'm going to read this trilogy that I just invented of modern American poetry. I've read the Norton one before, and I've read from the others before. The top one was a textbook for Amy Beater's poetry class, so we've got a lot of that. And I believe I've read that one in the middle. I'll read this one last, probably. This one in the middle. Actually, I don't know what order I'm reading these in, but I will read them. And the currently reading pile grows. It's always good to have a poetry book going. Maybe I'll leave it in my car. Okay, I love stuff like this. Symbols of transformation in dreams. As I said, I've written about dreams before. I think dreams are some crazy biz. And, you know, sometimes it's like, whoa, this is telling me everything about myself. More than I want to know. And other times it's like, what is going on? Other times it's like, is this real on some other plane of existence? Like, I always dream of locations that are consistent from dream to dream. And I'm like, what's that about? And I've had many dreams about an interdimensional airport of sorts. that is so real feeling, and I'm always like, oh, back here. This hallway's changed a little. I've not like read this book cover to cover, but I probably will. There's a very good chance of that. This was bought with intention to read. 89. I bet it's Jungian. Well, it starts with a Jung quote. Learn as much as you can about symbolism, then forget it all when you are analyzing a dream. Huh. We and God have business with each other, and in opening ourselves to his influence, our deepest destinies. Well, Mary Karr. I read this. The Art of Memour. I feel like there's not that many books about the Art of Memour. Cheryl Strayed says, will be the definitive book on reading and writing memoir for years to come. Yeah, maybe. And look, I think Mary Karr is cool. And I like her writing and I like her interviews. But this book says something super lame that I just can't get behind. It says, I gotta find where she says it exactly, but she basically says she starts every book with a flash forward. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That is such a tired trope now. I'm like rolling my eyes so hard when people are still doing that in 2025. I mean, it can be effective, but like, didn't we do that one already? It's like ending the movie with a musical number. Like, that was the early 2000s. Actually, I did like lots of musical numbers and stuff, but whatever. Anyway, just don't I don't know. That's like crazy advice to me. Well, this is a good thing for someone writing something like this to say, no one elected me the boss of memoir. I speak for no one but myself. Every writer worth her salt is sui generis. Memoirist methods with regard to handling actual events, memory research, dealing with family and other subjects, legal, whatnot, voice, etc., differ from mine as widely as their lives do. It takes an obsessive streak that borders on lunacy to go rummaging around in the past as memoirists are wont to do. Yeah, I read this and I kept it. I'll probably read it again. It's got weird stains on it. I love stuff like this. How to read a film. Treating film as text. The art, technology, language, history, and theory of film and media. Yeah. Art. Oh, good. It's got stills, etc. This looks great. Film is on. Yep. Extraordinary good introduction to film study. Yeah, sometimes film study books don't work for me. I had this one, what was it called? It was so academic, and it was like, this is exactly the kind of academic writing that Nietzsche wrote against, where it's like trying to sound smart, and it obscures instead of clarifies. But this looks good. This book is a compliment to the reader. Yeah, that's cool. Bookstores just don't quit with that stuff. Oh, here's another good specific writing thing. The Hidden Writer, Diaries and the Creative Life. Awesome, about diary keeping and how it can help you in your life as a creator. When I was teaching freshmen at UNM as a grad student, I could always tell who kept journals. I'm like, oh, you're a good writer. Do you keep a journal? Yeah. Huh. Yep, that's why. Stands with One Writer's Beginnings by Eudora Welty. That's in the nonfiction paperback section. I could read them both. Then I'll feel guilty and like I have to start keeping a journal again. And I'm doing enough. I kept one this summer, but it felt like a fake journal because it was like notes for stuff I knew I was going to write about it even while I was living the events of the summer. So it was like chicken scratch and shorthand notes and stuff. Sometimes it was like a journal. I don't know. Not always. Love zines. At one point, I had every book about zines that had ever been offered on paperback swap or that I could find online easily. I had so many zine anthologies, but I've often given them out to people. Zining is like a communal thing. You got to encourage it. So I didn't hold on to them all. I'm like, do I really need a book like this? No, I know how to make a freaking zine. Been zining since the 90s. Really been zining since the 80s if you count the little booklets I made for my family when I was a kid. I had a book for every pet that the family had ever owned, even the ones I'd never met. And I still have them in a box somewhere. Guess I could look at those someday. Don't worry, I probably won't. Not for a long time, till I've run out of all other subject matter. Actually, it could be funny, maybe. But zines are great. If you ever feel like just making a little zine about some subject and giving it out to your friends, do it. It's awesome. I was subbing in a high school, and some class that had their student make zines, and the zines were in the classroom. And one of them was like my walk to school, and it described this hyper local experience of all the different crosswalks and all this stuff. And I was like, that's fantastic. Zines can be about anything, and it's very cool. And if you make enough of them, it's a body of work eventually. R.I.P. my friend Brett Maverick, a.k.a. Brett Baker, a.k.a. Captain America. This Albuquerque zinester who had a long-running music scene called Wigwam Bam. Did 100 issues before he died too young. And that's like the best record of the Albuquerque music scene that exists, is that run of that zine now. If I were to ever write anything about... There's no need to write anything about the early 2000s of it, because you just collect all those. They're all concert reviews from local like house shows. Incredible. So zines are awesome. And, you know, it's fun to have something that you make with a post-commodity mentality. I realize zines aren't always in that realm, but my favorite zines generally are like the ones where there's just 25 and you give them out to a bunch of people. This looks like a smartly made book. Would be of benefit to the zine making reader. Make a zine. This was the textbook in a couple of classes I took with Jerome Shea at UNM. It's also by the guy who did that tropes book I looked at in another video, Richard Lanham. I tried to reread this recently and found it a bit dry and challenging, and just that I wasn't enjoying looking at language in that way very much. But I know I can get more into it. I just wasn't in the mentality. Sometimes I'm like, you know, this is the wrong way to approach art, but it's not wrong. It's just, it would be wrong if this was your only way that you approached art. Analyzing prose for its effectiveness and thinking about how it's kind of cool. It's like if you were a really good, like, intuitive mechanic that just knew how to fix a car and stuff. And then, you know, you read a book that got more into the electrical system or something and really told you all these details that you didn't mess with usually and didn't think about. Is that a good analogy? But I like that it uses red ink. That's cool. And, you know, as Jerome Shea would always say, you got to rub your nose in the prose. I mean, just like, look at it. See what makes it work. It's not going to hurt your writing to do that. My daughter Anodyne had this in her room for a long time. I'm surprised she gave it back. Heretic's Handbook of Quotations. This was a gift, I think, from my younger sister. Topics like anarchism, Marxism, revolution, the military, war, capitalism, labor, police and thieves, living music, women, misogyny. The arts. Hell. Oh, Thoreau. It is impossible to give a soldier a good education without making him a deserter. Joe Hill again. Don't waste any time in mourning. Organize. Yeah. Oh, Nietzsche, you're so funny. Woman was God's second mistake. Ha ha ha. Comics. To plunder, to slaughter, to steal, these things they misname empire, and where they make a desert, they call it peace. Calvicus. I like having quote books around. Aphorisms are really hard to do. I mean, I think they might be the hardest thing to just sit down and write. Just something pithy and effective. And I think the hardest aphorisms to write are jokes, honestly. And the shorter, the more challenging. But like the way I can write aphorisms is excerpting them from larger works. Like I'm going to have a chapter called Aphorisms from Shadows, because I have a chapter called Epigrams for Shadows, and it's the epigram chapter at the start of my book. But at the end, it'll have a chapter of arranged quotes from 60 chapters of my book. And they'll be arranged in like some sort of poetic way. But yeah, that's the plan. Kind of serve as a bookend. Epigrams for Shadows and Aphorisms from Shadows. And it'll be kind of cool to see like what are the most effective lines from all these different things and how can they be used differently. That'll be a fun like victory lap one to write toward the end of book 2. Place images and media. This was like left outside of the Daily Lobo offices back when I used to write for them in a newspaper box. snatched it up, and it's awesome. Chapters of this have really informed my writing at different times, and they're about all sorts of different things. Look at this. Like, is a book like this even real? Doesn't it just seem like a prop or something? Something kind of magical that comes into your life. It's so plain. It's from this like whole branch of writing that you're like, how many thousands of books are there on place and place images and like what college major studies this stuff? Geography, I think. Who are those people? Geographers? I took a human geography class once and it was fantastic, actually. That could have been an alternate life for me. American studies, geography, cosmology, history. It's all the stuff I'm interested in. A place, what a good theme. Urban landscape and women's fiction. I don't think these markings are mine. Urban landscapes and women's fiction. Your writing and environmental experience. Oh, this one was great. A place of delightful prospects, promotional imagery, and the selling of the suburbs. Yes. Much info there. Changing images of the Arizona territory. Wow. Anything else I thought was in here that's not jumping out at me about this photographer? Maybe that's a different book. Yeah, you gotta have books like that. I should tape this one up a little. Very nice. Okay, I think this guy can get kind of obnoxious on Twitter and has many detractors. But I got this book from way back in the day. Extremely valuable book, Noam Chomsky. And I've kept it because of what it has to say about the evolutionary origins of language. And it's so interesting. Jerome Shea used to always bring it to my writing classes as an undergrad and grad student and quote from it about how like all words for hunger in all languages have kind of a swallowing sound in them, hunger. And all words for thirst have like a hissing sibilant sound, thirst, thirsty. So interesting. That stuff's so cool. Linguistics, man, that's the topic. It's so good. But I'll definitely read this sometime. Noam Chomsky likes it. Noam Chomsky, also a linguist in addition to all his political biz. How the mind creates language, the language instinct. What's up? Fun fact, this guy's also Kenny G. That's not true. Now you wouldn't know it looking at this book here. I just bought this book today at Joy Junction Thrift Store. Shadowboxing, Art and Craft in Creative Nonfiction. I couldn't believe this book exists. There's not that many books about creative nonfiction by Kristen Iversen. And look at this. Look at how it approaches nonfiction, all the major subgenres of this burgeoning field. The memoir, the personal essay, literary journalism, nature writing, biography and history, and the nonfiction novel. I have all those elements in my book, so I guess it's maybe a big creative nonfiction thing, and this will be a good book for me to read. The approach is systematic and useful, and the volume as a whole embodies a refreshing break from the anthologies and guides currently in use. Look at that shade he's throwing at guides. These so-called guides. Trash. That's what they are. They're trash. David Lenoir of Western Kentucky University doesn't want your trash guides. This one's good. All the others. Quote signs. I'm putting quote signs around. When is nonfiction not creative? Try this experiment. Walk into a bookstore and ask the clerk where to find the section on creative nonfiction. Most likely you'll be met with a blank look. Do you mean memoir? Nature writing? Essays? Biography? True crime? Creative nonfiction is nonfiction prose that demonstrates skillful use of literary technique. Okay, voice, mood, tone, symbol, metaphor, dialogue, characterization, plot, epiphany. All the elements used by the fiction writer or any good writer serve the creative nonfiction writer. Yeah! Okay, I'm going to like this book. Creative nonfiction is literary writing that is based, perhaps loosely, perhaps rigidly, on real-life situations. Creative nonfiction depends upon factual information in ways that fiction does not. Yeah. The way I always explain it is that with both fiction and nonfiction, you can think of it as like building something with blocks, like an arch or something. And with nonfiction, those blocks have to be, with fiction, those blocks can be really small. You know, you can change a character's eye color and change that little tiny block out. You can change the day something happens on, or change anything, change the whole story, set it 1,000 years in the future, or 1,000 years in the past, you know. But And so you've got this thing in fiction that's like created out of all these tiny little things because you can make all those decisions. And then in nonfiction, the blocks are bigger. It's like, nope, this is the character's hair color. This is what they did on this day. It's documented. You know, all these things that you have to respect. I really think nonfiction has a lot to do with intent too. There's authors where they just talk and I'm like, you just don't have the nonfiction intent. Then there's authors that just need a different label. They're doing something different. Like Annie Dillard is writing nonfiction of what's going on in her mind, but she's just changing stuff to create a new world with her books. I mean, she literally bought a story from a grad student to open Pilgrim at Tinker Creek with. That's not scrupulous nonfiction. That's not how I operate, but I also am like, I love Annie Dillard. Her books are great. You know, she's doing something different there. I don't know. I'm always disappointed when I find out something's not scrupulously true, you know? Because it makes a work better if you're like, and it's true. It more or less happened. What you just read there. I wonder why this is called shadowboxing. Is that a Cornellian reference? It must be. Joseph Cornell? Maybe this is the coolest person ever that wrote this, and I should be friends. Kristen Iversen. University of Memphis. Grew up in Colorado. Wrote a nuclear memoir. Oh my gosh. I have a nuclear memoir chapter. Because I grew up in the 80s. Okay. Very glad I have this book. What a find. Gotta get some rubbing alcohol. I know there are good tags. Savers has good tags. So why do other stores not figure that out? Make it like a project to get things off the book. Ugh. If you can even get it off without damaging them. Family Thrift, I love you, but you're the worst. Stapling the pages? Give me a break. This looks quite old. Modern English Usage Dictionary. H.W. Fowler. Oh, this is like a famous thing. Fowler's. In essentials, Fowler's modern English usage can never be out of date, for his primary concern was to teach clear thinking and the orderly use of precise words, to castigate whatever is slovenly, pretentious, or pedantic. This would be crazy to just read. What? You can look up anything. Usage. Okay, I gotta remember I have this. A little compact book. It's awesome. Whoa. Domina Nustio Illumia. Great, I just woke up some ancient evil. Always doing that. I've read this a couple times. The first 5 pages, A Writer's Guide to Staying Out of the Rejection Pile. Oh, I remember in the early 2000s being like, my book will be done so soon. I am the gatekeeper of my own destiny, and I will have my glory day in the sun, to quote Nacho Libre. But, you know, writing your way to where you want to be, it can be a process. It is the writer's job to show us what his characters are like by their actions. The writer must always ask himself if the details he includes further the purpose of his book. If not, he should remove them. Sure, that's good advice. Train your ear. Pay attention to people talking. Eavesdrop. Heck yeah. Dialogue reveals the skill of a writer instantaneously. Yeah, I remember a time in my early 20s where I realized, I don't think I'm good at dialogue. I gotta think about this and work on this. And I did for a long time. And I'm like, it's fine. You just gotta hear the people in your head. Even so many of these so-called great fiction writers admit in interviews that they base almost all their voices on voices they've heard, you know. People they know. Oh, exercises. I've done this. Writing stuff like this is fun. Oh, that I were of the idle rich and could just do things like this. What are you doing today? I'm doing all the exercises in the first 5 pages. Yeah, reducing the numbers of adjectives and adverbs, that probably is true. That said, if you learn how to use things well, you can use literally anything. Write lucidly. Present what you say in the most articulate and forceful way. Confidence. You stumble anywhere? What felt wrong? Oh yeah, I'm always writing the word clunky in margins of my own work. Clunky! And I'm always writing Just rewrite this, it sucks. Yeah, place it sounds wrong. I say read your work silently, read it out loud. Read it silently, read it out loud. I've heard of people changing their fonts and stuff. That's painful to me. Maybe done some messing around with that. Reformatting. Yeah, books like this are good. Just like, if you're going to be a writer, you got to take it serious. Care about the craft. Be an autodidact. Educate yourself. Be obsessive. I always think of that anecdote about Socrates. It's definitely not true. He's hanging out in a cave by a grotto, like modern people imagine him doing. And a student comes to him, a would-be student, and is like, "How can I be as wise as you, O Socrates?" And Socrates tackles him and holds his head under the water until he's almost dead, because apparently he's a psychopath. And then afterward, the guy's like, "Why did you do that? You almost drowned me." And Socrates is all, "When you seek wisdom as much as you just sought air, then will you truly be as wise as me?" So that story doesn't track. It doesn't sound like him on any level. But I have heard it told in classes. I think in church when I was young. Haha. Folklore. But it is a useful notion that, like, yeah, you want to learn, you just have to be hungry to learn. This strange book, given to me while walking across the country in Philadelphia from some people we were staying with in an apartment there. How taped up it is. All my notes to my young self. Read Kundera's Life is Elsewhere. I've seen that phrase as graffiti. Read this in 2001, 2005, and 2019, and 2006. Does this book mention even one book written by a woman? Or even one woman not written by a man? Oh, wow. That actually is a good question of this book, and I think I remember that now. Apodictic, clearly established or beyond repute. Another list of books from this book that I feel like I should read. But I just end up rereading this book. I think I've read it another time since those notes in the back, too. I still haven't read any of these books. I've tried to read... I read The Castle. Tried to read Tristram Shandy. And I will. It's in the paperback case. But this book just helped me think about some really key concepts in writing at an early and easily influenced stage of my writing life. It was like the first time I'd heard somebody really talk a lot about polyphony and multiple meaning and so on, things that I'd noticed in writing before. That's the artist Eva Avenue. It might be from when we first met. One of my great friends now. I hadn't seen her in forever, and when we were in New York City, flying back, me and my daughter, after her disappearance to New York and Connecticut and hospitalization in 2022, story I told in part in another video. Eva heard we were coming through New York and was like, "You got to stay with us." And it was great. But she lived in this apartment from the 1800s, and it had really low doorways, and I hit my head super hard and got a bad concussion. And then it made me all spacey and contributed to me and my daughter missing our flight and having to spend 24 hours in the airport. So that was an adventure. But Eva's doing great work. Look up Eva Avenue's art on Instagram and elsewhere. Speaking of zines, she wrote the Nightly Noodle Monthly. That was a key Albuquerque zine for a long time. Had a great aesthetic. Truly different. Cornelian. But understand me, if I locate myself outside the so-called psychological novel, that does not mean that I wish to deprive my characters of an interior life. It means only that there are other enigmas, other questions that my novels pursue primarily. The Good Soldier Schweik is perhaps the last great popular novel. I love when people make these pronouncements. There hasn't been a good movie in decades. Okay, I'll just be over here watching good movies. How has Kafka managed to transform such gray, anti-poetical material into fascinating novels? This book really puts notes about some fictional thing I was writing a long time ago. There's also interviews with him. You know, I think good stuff comes from being exposed to art too soon sometimes. You know, just reading something when you're not quite prepared for it. Not that, yeah, this is just thinking about the novel in depth when I was only like 20, 21. It was pretty cool. So there's a lot of drama in this book. That was when our hike broke up for a little while, our hike across the country. And then we had a big group meeting to discuss the future because we were going to continue on as two groups. And we all did group therapy basically and decided to stay on together, get all 6 of us to the end. And we did. And I wrote a miniseries about it. If you're a Netflix exec, hit me up. Or you work for HBO or a streaming platform. It's called What We Found When We Walked Across America. Language and social context. This is interesting. Not in great shape. They got this from Savers. Where do I have this? Sociological areas where sociolinguistics has a particular contribution to make. Face-to-face interaction, social and cultural structures, and the study of social change and social conflict. Wow. More linguistic stuff. Good old books. Can't go wrong with books. Well, you totally can. There definitely have been some harmful books in history. That's why Emerson says the devil rests comfortably in every form. Don't fetishize the book too much. It's just a container of consciousness. Who said that? Who called it that? I forget. But I quote that somewhere. What is a book but a container of consciousness? Oh, it was in The Recognitions by William Gaddis. Life. All right. Take care, everybody.